Hey guys, Jim here. Welcome into Guest Blade episode number 9. This is going to be a particularly fun episode because we're going to get a chance to discover the work of two different makers in one knife. This was a very creative collaboration between two modern legendary makers, Jeremy Marsh and Jim Burke. And these two guys are really known for creating masterful and unique works of art, both in their flowing shapes throughout their handles and their blades, and even the smallest components like the thumb studs, to the wonderfully complex grinds and incredible fit and finish that they're both known for. And to see both of them working together on one knife, on one design, it truly is a magnificent work of art. And something that I think any of us honestly would feel treasured to own a knife from either one of them, but to certainly have one knife that was touched by them both, that's pretty damn incredible. Now, before I get off too much on the knife or into the makers as much, I do want to give a shout out and big thanks to J Diesel Joe 69, who owns this knife and was kind enough to just offer it up out of the blue. For those that may not remember, episode number 8 was the Reese Wyland Wolverine, also from Joe's collection. And as I was texting him and letting him know, hey, I'm shipping your Wolverine back, he says, hey, would you want to take a look at anything else? He goes, oh, I've got this great Burke and Marsh collaboration. I'm like, what? I didn't even know they did a collaboration. So needless to say, I was very excited when he mentioned that. He did send a couple of more knives. I am going to be doing another Guest Blade review very shortly with one of his others. So let's talk about this knife. This was a collaboration from scratch between Jim Burke and Jeremy Marsh. And I sent Jim a message just yesterday. I've been able to have some really wonderful conversation with Jim. He's a super phenomenal guy. I mean, obviously he's very busy, but he's actually made a lot of time just to kind of, bullshit around and talk about a few things over the past year. And I certainly very much appreciate that. For him giving up his time. So I shot him a quick message and I said, hey, I've got this really cool knife in my hands that you obviously had a hand in. Can you give me any kind of little bit of background? So he says, yeah. He goes, we designed this from scratch. And he goes, I feel it's a really great representation of both of our styles, all done into one knife. He goes, the Disciple is a very utilitarian kind of knife, but it's designed to have the look of a combat fighter. And you'll understand that a little bit more when I get it opened up. I don't want to open up yet because I really want this amazing blade to be kind of like a grand reveal. He says the piece was done last year for last year's Tactical Knife Invitational. And basically what Jim did is he prepped the whole knife. He did the blade grinds. He did the beautiful two-tone finish that you're going to see, that you can see part of it right there on that top swedge. He did the lockup, the back spacer, which is absolutely amazing. It's a full floating back spacer. And he did the contouring of the frames. And then at that point, he sent it off to Jeremy. He did his traditional sculpted pocket clip. And I love this 3D pocket clip. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. He did the thumb studs, of course, that's a signature of his, and did all of this carving. And it turns out that is quite a tremendous amount of carving that went into this. When I asked him about this, I said, what is this? Because it has, I'll be honest with you, almost like a rubbery feeling to it when you're just kind of running your fingers over it. He says it's a really super heavy stippling that Jeremy does. And then he does a hard blast, and he's got several hours with a hand carver in each and every one of these components. So this scale here, the entire floating back spacer, and the scale back here. And it really is pretty amazing because it gives you the look of a bolstered knife, like you've got a bolster here and some sort of scale, but this is all just, I don't want to say just, but this is all one piece of titanium. They do a nice mill line here, and then he does all this incredible stippling throughout the entire rest of the frame, all the way around. And it comes out with this, it looks brown, and it takes on little purplish hues in some areas as well. Then of course you see there's a beautiful satin finish to the titanium up toward in the bolster area. I love this very clean pivot design. Almost looks like a like some sort of like spike or stud, something that you would have seen on, I don't know, a 1980s headbanger, the kind of studs that they wore. Backside of the pivot, pretty standard. So you've got a nice custom pivot that's going to be utilitarian in the sense that you just need a Torx to make any adjustments. Now obviously a knife made to this quality degree, you're probably never going to have to make a single adjustment. So let's kind of soak in the beauty of the exterior before we open this thing up and start getting wowed by the blade. There is Jeremy Marsh's signature 3D contoured titanium pocket clip. I've not placed this in the pocket because, again, when I get somebody else's knife for a guest blade, I'm not going to go running around carrying it. I'm not going to do anything that could put maybe pocket wear or marks on a knife that they may never intend on carrying and keep only in a glass case. I don't know. It's not my place to do that. But I would assume the way that this is flared upwards like that, it's going to fit nice and easily into the pocket. And you'll notice the lack of hardware. All the hardware is going to be on the interior of the frame where you don't see it. So it's completely hidden and it gives you a nice, clean, continuous flow to the design of the knife. You'll see the back spacer was made here elongated to give you a very large lanyard opening. And I just love the execution of that. Even with the blade closed, we could still see all the way through on that floating back spacer. The craftsmanship, the fit and finish is exactly what you would expect from them, which is perfection. And we'll give you a nice tight look at Jeremy Marsh's thumb stud. Not only is it contoured and made to look beautiful, but it's actually very functional. It's very easy to manipulate. There is Jeremy Marsh's maker's mark there. I do believe Jim's is on the other side. There it is. The JB diamond right there. Now it's time to pop this bad boy open. And you could open it slowly and feel how silky smooth it is, or you could do this and realize how fast that action is. This is a perfectly executed compound grind. I am absolutely amazed. When I opened this up for the first time, I believe I might have let out a gasp, like a small child, like a little girl. Look at that. The finishing work, the grinds, and the sharpness. This is a very sharp knife. I don't even have to test it to know it. You can just kind of feel that stickiness, you know, when you go to run your finger across it. And yes, my thumb is torn up from all the lock bars over the past few months playing with all these knives. I really am impressed. I've loved both makers' works. It's impossible to get onto. I know you cannot get onto Marsh's books. I don't think you can get onto Jim's. I don't believe they're open. I feel very fortunate to be on Jim's books and have a project coming up, hopefully not too long from now, because he's just one of those makers that you have to get something made by him, and Marsh is the same way. When you see this level of precision, you understand why their prices start where they do. You're not going to buy a $500 Jim Burke or $500 Jeremy Marsh. Now, Burke does do some mid-tech work. I think the Villain is one of them. He has another one that's done as a mid-tech or almost a semi-production piece. But I'm talking just with their full customs. Yeah, they're expensive, but man, they are worth it. Let's take a look at that lockup. One of the things we want to check for, no side-to-side play with the lock bar disengaged. This is, if you watched the last video I uploaded, I was talking about a conversation that I had for a couple of hours with Todd Begg, and he said one of the things that you want to do, he goes, you know, makers can cheat their side-to-side play and make you think they have a better fitting pivot than they really do because the lock bar holds it in place. So when I open that up and I try to wiggle that blade, it's not going nowhere. Lockup is nice and solid, and you'll see the ergonomics for such a big knife, and I'll discuss that in a second here. It's a huge knife, but the ergonomics are fantastic. Just wait for my camera to focus. There we go. It feels wonderful in the hand, and they are really using every bit of that handle to fit that blade in there. So let's give a few size comparisons here for those that are curious. I'm really kind of having to break out my biggest knives. You guys know my beloved, my Joel Perella Brian Ty Bengal, which is the biggest knife I do believe in my collection, and it's only slightly larger than this. Put it next to a Bodega, which a lot of people know the size on that. And as you guys know, I like to put it butt to butt. Wow, it really dwarfs that Bodega, doesn't it? And it's kind of neat how the belly of the blade actually fits into the shape of the contouring of that blade. So that was kind of interesting. Let's get that out of the way since there's no comparison there. Put it next to my Hoback Quayback, which is another pretty big knife. Still bigger than the Quayback. And some things that maybe are a little bit more common. Large Sebenza, for your size reference. And very, very much bigger than a large Sebenza. What else might I have? Spyderco Tough. And the Tough is not a small knife by any stretch of the imagination. So there you go. There's your basic size comparisons there out of the way. Get a better understanding of just how monstrously huge this knife really is. I would love to be able to tell you about the blade steel and whatnot like I typically do, but it's not marked. At least that I have seen. No, it's not marked anywhere. And I didn't even think to ask Jim. And honestly, Jim's a busy guy. I'm not going to, keep him forever asking about one knife. Let's talk about the makers for a second while we ogle the beauty of this nice and close up. When we talk about Jim Burke, we'll start there since he's the one that did the basis of the work or the beginning of the work on this. He's just kind of pretty much an all-around badass when you think about it. He was in law enforcement for a long time, and he worked his way through different areas of law enforcement, even getting into SWAT and fugitive apprehension, things like that. So, I mean, the man has seen some things. Then he went into the private sector, into protection and recovery. And when you add to that he's had a lifetime of being a hunter and an all-around outdoorsman, he's pretty much used knives in every capacity that most anybody possibly ever would. And he always keeps that in mind when he's designing a new knife, coming up with something interesting. While his stuff is artistic and it's beautiful, it's always going to have a certain degree of functionality to them, to make them a practical knife. Even if it doesn't seem practical with all the flowing lines and the crazy grinds, everything is going to be practical to some degree. Basically, he started off making knives just for himself and his fellow officers. He found that there were certain needs that weren't fulfilled out in the market. The same reason that Rick Hinderer, got into making knives. He had a very specific field, and there really weren't any knives that satisfied his specific needs. So he says, well, screw it, I'm going to make my own. And a few of the guys liked what he was doing, and he decided to make some for them as well. Oh, God, look at that backspacer. Basically, he made his first knife in 1989, but he didn't go into full-time knife making until 2005. And since then, he's really just built a legendary name on his quality, his fit and finish, his insanely sharp knives. You should go visit his YouTube channel. He doesn't have a lot of videos up there, but I mean, he does stuff with hanging rope cut tests and cutting through phone books and stabbing into steel drums. I mean, crazy, crazy stuff, and still showing how durable and sharp his knives are after doing crazy shit like that. So the guy is truly talented, truly gifted. From what I've experienced, again, we're not like best buddies. We don't sit in each other's laps and tongue each other in the ear or anything like that. It's I don't want it to come off sounding like that. Like, well, me and him are best buddies. We've had some wonderful interactions, and from the conversations that I've had with him, I found him to be a very down to earth and very humble kind of guy. I mean, when you get to this level of knife making, when people say your name in the right circles, and if you listen carefully, angels begin to sing. some of those guys can start to develop a little bit of an ego, or in some cases, a huge ego. And he's just not like that. He's just a really humble guy that seems to be, and again, this is just my impression of him, he seems to be genuinely grateful that people like the work that he does. And that's the kind of guy that I like to spend my money with. Not the guy that knows how great he is and and prices his stuff accordingly and makes it where you'll never get his stuff. The only reason you can't get Jim's stuff is just overwhelming popularity. Now we talk about Jeremy Marsh. And Marsh is a guy I've had absolutely zero contact with, but the knives that I've seen from him, I can tell you right now, I've wanted a Marsh since the very first picture I ever saw of one. His Vanquish has really catapulted him into the stratosphere for popularity. Everybody wants one of his knives. And once the Vanquish came out there, everybody just went, oh, damn. And it just seems like every model he makes, and go visit his website, he's got a nice professionally built website, unlike a lot of makers, where you can actually view the models, and he does such amazing work. He was just an average blade nut like the rest of us. And he basically taught himself how to make knives. He had a little bit of guidance, but he did basically teach himself. He got inspiration from reading through magazines and seeing the articles and the artistry that was out there. And one day he just pulled the Benchmade production knife out of his pocket, tore it down, learned how it worked, and kind of went from there and started making knives from there. His background is as a die maker. So he's certainly got the technical proficiency to accomplish the initial basic tasks for making a knife. And from there, you take his incredible skill and his imagination, and he's done something wonderfully unique. His knives almost look like alien creations in some way. They're almost, and this is going to sound really, really ridiculous, but it's the only way I can put it into words. There's almost a sensual shape to the knives that he makes. And again, I don't think it really paints his art in the right light, but I think it's the only way to truly put it into words how I feel his knives are made. And I hope you guys can understand that. It's the fluidity in which his lines flow and his blades and his handles and everything else. And I think this is a wonderful representation of both makers. Now, while none of us are ever going to get a chance to own this knife, it certainly is nice to see in the flesh, as it were, in HD, the kind of unique creativity that comes out of two gifted and talented knife makers coming together and creating one soulful piece. This is one that, again, Joe, this guy has the most jaw-dropping collection. It's another one, Joe, that I got to tell you, I am very envious, and not in a negative way, like, oh, I hate you and you got such great stuff and my stuff is crap now. I don't mean it like that. I mean, I'm very happy for you that you're able to find such unique pieces, but yeah, I'm a little bit jealous. I would love to have something like this in my collection. These are the kind of knives, folks, that will live on forever. This is the kind of knife that you'll pass on to your kids. This is the kind of knife that, in 100 years, you're still going to hear names like Marsh and Burke thrown around. People talking about the greatest knives that have ever been made. You're going to hear the Mayos and the Southards and the Rexfords and the Hibbins and the Carsons. And I think these two guys, they haven't just carved a niche in the industry. They're not just this underground thing that only the knife collector forum guys know about. They've put a name out there. I mean, you look at the collaborations that have been done with, the big production houses. Who is it that does the Mini Vanquish? Oh, Burke. Burke bought the rights to the design, made their Mini Vanquish. And there are people right now that have a Burke Mini Vanquish in their pocket. They probably have never even heard of Jeremy Marsh and know where it came from. And at some point they will. The name is out there. The quality is phenomenal. And while most of us are never going to own a knife made by him or made by Jim Burke, to know that it exists, to hear the name, to know the name, to recognize the name, to hit Google, look at the pictures and the videos of the astounding pieces of cutlery that they've made and that they've made with their own hands. These are not knives that are 50%, 80%, 90% made on a machine. These are guys that are hand contouring everything, that are building everything oversized and then hand fitting each component. You know, like just some simple things like the blade stop. I guarantee that was oversized and then hand fit down to fit within the holes they have on the inside of the bolsters. That's the way these guys operate. And it really is truly an honor to sit here and show this to you, to share it with you and enjoy this with you. Yeah, I'm gonna die a little bit on the inside when I have to put this back in that case and ship it back to Joe. But I have to thank him again for sharing his beautiful collection so selflessly and so graciously. And look forward, guys. I've got a few more Guest Blade segments coming up. One I'm particularly excited about. I'm actually vibrating with excitement. The collaboration between Jens Anzo and Lucas Burnley. You guys remember the 10 knives that they made called the Zeta? I have one coming. It shipped today. And in a matter of days, I'm going to have it in my hands, sitting here, ready to put it under my lens. I'm going to be doing kind of a lot coming up very soon. I was just contacted by a Rockstead retailer, so I'm going to have the opportunity to possibly have a few different types of Rocksteads outside of the ones that I have owned and that I still own, and give you a little bit of a better look at their collection, because a lot of people just haven't had a chance to hold them. And that's what Guest Blade is all about. And all of you guys have been so wonderful, so generous with your collections, and I honestly cannot thank you enough, and I know my subscribers are certainly enjoying it. You guys rock. I love you all. I'll be back very soon with another video, and until then, oh, just stare at that beauty. Good night, guys.